The empath's journey into self-forgiveness is not a straight path, but a spiral winding deeper into the psyche with each turn. The shadow, that Jungian mirror of all that is hidden, does not yield easily. It clings like damp earth, heavy with the weight of old stories, moments of perceived failure, choices that left scars, silences that spoke louder than words. For the empath, these are not mere memories, but living energies, archetypes of the wounded self that pulse within the collective unconscious. They are the martyr who gave too much, the judge who condemned their own heart, the child who learned to soothe others before themselves. To forgive is to meet these figures not with resistance, but with a willingness to listen, to understand their origins, and to release their hold. The process is raw, almost alchemical. Jung spoke of individuation as the integration of opposites, the marriage of light and dark within the self. For the empath, this means confronting the paradox of their nature. Their profound capacity to feel is both their gift and their burden. They have spent lifetimes, metaphorical or otherwise, absorbing the unspoken, carrying the grief of strangers, the anger of loved ones, the quiet despair of a world that often feels too heavy. Yet in this act of carrying, they have often neglected their own wounds, believing that to tend to themselves is to betray their purpose. This belief, rooted in the collective archetype of the selfless healer, becomes a chain. Self-forgiveness is the key that unlocks it, but the lock is rusted, the key unfamiliar in their hands. Why is it so hard to turn compassion inward? The answer lies in the interplay of ego and attachment. The empath's ego, shaped by early experiences of attunement, often constructs an identity around being needed. Modern attachment theory reveals how this dynamic forms a child who learns to prioritize others' emotions, to feel secure, carries this pattern into adulthood. The empath's worth becomes tied to their ability to soothe, to heal, to be the container for others' chaos. But what happens when they falter? When their boundaries slip, when they lash out in exhaustion, when they cannot save someone from their pain? The ego, fragile in its self-imposed perfection, turns inward with blame. The shadow grows, whispering that they are not enough. To forgive oneself is to dismantle this illusion. It is to recognize that the empath's mistakes are not failures, but expressions of their humanity, moments when the archetype of the healer meets the archetype of the human. Jung taught that the shadow is not the enemy, but the teacher, the raw material of growth. For the empath, this means seeing their missteps, the harsh word, the missed opportunity, the moment of self-betrayal, as threads in the tapestry of their becoming. What would it feel like, empath, to hold those moments not as evidence of your unworthiness, but as proof of your courage to feel so deeply? To forgive is to reclaim these pieces, to weave them into a self that is whole, not despite its flaws, but because of them. This act of reclamation is not solitary. The collective unconscious, that vast reservoir of shared human experience, pulses with the stories of others who have walked this path. The empath, so attuned to this collective, can draw strength from it, recognizing that their struggle is not unique but universal. Every soul who has dared to love, to feel, to falter, has faced this same reckoning. The mother who snapped in exhaustion, the friend who couldn't stay, the lover who walked away, their shadows too cry out for forgiveness. In this shared humanity, the empath finds a mirror, a reminder that to forgive themselves is to participate in a larger act of healing, one that ripples outward. And yet the practice is intimate, almost sacred. It begins in the quiet moments when you empaths sit with the ache of your own regrets and choose to breathe through them rather than turn away. It is in the pause before you judge yourself, the choice to ask, what was I learning in that moment, rather than why did I fail? It is in the gentle act of placing a hand on your own heart and whispering, you did what you could with what you knew. This is the compassion that transforms, the alchemy that turns shame into wisdom. It is not about erasing the past, but about reframing it, seeing it as a story of growth rather than a litany of sins. The empath's power lies not in their perfection, but in their ability to hold the messiness of being human. To forgive oneself is to step into this power to claim a compassion that is as fierce as it is tender. It is to stand in the tension of light and shadow to say, I am both, and I am enough. The spiral of self-forgiveness deepens, pulling the empath into a confrontation with their own mythos, the stories they've woven about who they must be. These stories, born from the interplay of personal history and the collective unconscious, are not mere narratives, but living archetypes that shape the empath's reality. The savior who must never falter, the nurturer who must always give. These are the masks they wear, polished by years of absorbing others' needs. Yet beneath these masks lies the shadow, heavy with the weight of moments when the empath could not live up to their own ideals. To forgive oneself is to peel back these layers, to stand naked before the truth that perfection was never the goal, wholeness was. This journey is not a quiet one. It roars with the intensity of the psyche's untamed corners, where the ego clings to its illusions like a shipwrecked sailor to driftwood. Jung's concept of the shadow reminds us that what we reject within ourselves does not vanish. It festers, shaping our choices in ways we barely perceive. For the empath, the shadow often takes the form of guilt, a relentless judge that tallies every moment they fell short. The time they turned away from someone's pain, overwhelmed by their own. The boundary they failed to set, leaving their heart bruised. The anger they let slip, sharp and unintended. These are the fragments the empath buries, believing that to acknowledge them is to betray their essence. But the shadow does not ask for denial, it asks for integration. Integration is the heart of individuation, the Jungian path toward becoming whole. It is not about erasing the parts of oneself that feel unworthy, but about recognizing them as essential to the self's unfolding. The empath, so skilled at holding space for others' contradictions, must learn to offer this same grace to themselves. What does it mean to forgive the moment you snapped, when exhaustion turned your compassion to ash? It means seeing that moment not as a failure, but as a cry from the soul, a signal that you too are human, bound by the same limits as those you seek to heal. It means understanding that your anger, your withdrawal, your mistakes are not betrayals, but expressions of a self, struggling to be seen. This struggle is universal, etched into the collective unconscious, where the archetypes of the wounded and the healer dance. The empath, attuned to this dance, feels its rhythm in their bones, the push and pull of giving and needing, of loving and faltering. Modern psychology, particularly attachment theory, offers a lens for this. The empath's tendency to prioritize others often stems from early patterns of earning love through self-sacrifice. To forgive oneself is to rewrite this contract, to declare that worth is not earned by how much you give, but by the simple fact of your existence. This is a radical act, one that challenges the ego's need for external validation and invites the empath to find validation within. What would it feel like, empath, to release the story that you must be flawless to be worthy, to stand in the mirror of your own soul and see not a ledger of debts but a map of growth? This is the work of self-forgiveness, to trace the lines of your mistakes and find in them the contours of your becoming. It is to sit with the discomfort of your humanity and choose to love it not despite its flaws, but because of them. This act is not a destination, but a practice, a daily return to the self, with eyes softened by compassion. It is the choice to say, I am learning, and that is enough. The empath's gift is their ability to feel the world's pulse, but their power lies in turning that gift inward. To forgive oneself is to claim this power, to step into the archetype of the wise fool, one who stumbles yet rises with deeper understanding. It is to recognize that every wound, every misstep is a thread in the tapestry of individuation, weaving the empath closer to wholeness. The collective unconscious hums with this truth that every soul who has dared to feel deeply has also faced the shadow of their own imperfections. In forgiving themselves, the empath joins this chorus, their voice adding to the harmony of human becoming. This harmony ripples outward. The empath who learns to forgive themselves becomes a beacon, not because they are perfect, but because they are real. Their compassion, once reserved for others, now flows freely, a river that nourishes both self and world. To forgive is to set down the burden of being everything to everyone and to embrace the messy, beautiful truth of being human. It is to dance with the shadow, not to banish it, but to let it teach you how to love. The empath's dance with self-forgiveness grows more intricate, a rhythm that pulses between surrender and resistance, between the longing for wholeness and the fear of what it demands. The shadow, that Jungian well of all that is disowned, does not simply dissolve under the gaze of compassion. It shifts, revealing new layers, new truths. For the empath, these truths are often tied to the archetype of the martyr, the one who sacrifices their own light to keep others' flames burning. This archetype, woven into the fabric of their psyche, whispers that their worth lies in how much they can endure, how deeply they can absorb the world's pain. To forgive oneself is to challenge this sacred lie, to step out of the martyr's robes and into the raw, unscripted truth of being human. This step is not taken lightly. The martyr archetype is seductive, offering a sense of purpose, a role that feels noble, even as it drains. Jung's concept of the collective unconscious reveals why this archetype holds such sway. It is ancient, etched into humanity's story through tales of saints, mothers, and unsung heroes who gave all for others. The empath, with their porous heart, feels this archetype keenly, their life often a mirror of its patterns, giving until they break, loving until they bleed, forgiving others while withholding that same grace from themselves. The shadow grows in this imbalance, heavy with the weight of unacknowledged needs, unspoken resentments, and the quiet belief that they do not deserve the compassion they so freely offer. To forgive oneself is to confront this belief head-on, to stand in the crucible where the martyr meets the self. It is to ask, why do I believe my pain matters less than another's? The answer often lies in the interplay of early attachment and societal conditioning. Modern psychology tells us that empaths often emerge from environments where love was contingent on caretaking, where their value was measured by how well they soothed others' storms. This creates a psychic imprint: to be needed is to be loved, to be selfless is to be worthy. But what happens when the empath falters, when their own needs rise like a tide they cannot ignore? The shadow judges, whispering that to prioritize themselves is to betray their purpose. Yet this is the very betrayal the empath must embrace. Jung's individuation process demands the integration of opposite self and other, light and dark, giving and receiving. To forgive oneself is to honor this balance, to recognize that self-compassion is not a theft from others, but a foundation for truer connection. What would it mean, empath, to pause in the act of giving and ask, what do I need in this moment? To forgive is to allow yourself this question, to let the answer unfold without judgment. It is to see your needs not as weaknesses, but as sacred, as vital to the alchemy of your becoming. This alchemy is messy, unpredictable. The empath's journey of self-forgiveness is not a linear ascent, but a descent into the heart's wild terrain, where guilt and grace coexist. The shadow does not vanish. It transforms, becoming a teacher rather than a tormentor. Consider the moment you lashed out when exhaustion turned your words to blades. The shadow would have you believe this moment defines you, proof of your unworthiness. But to forgive is to rewrite this story, to see that moment as a cry for rest, a plea for boundaries, a human response to an impossible demand. It is to hold that version of yourself with the same tenderness you offer a grieving friend, to say, you were doing your best, and that is enough. The collective unconscious hums with this possibility, a chorus of souls who have faced their own shadows and found redemption not in perfection, but in acceptance. The empath, so attuned to this collective, can draw strength from it, recognizing that their struggle is not solitary, but shared. Every heart that has stumbled, every soul that has judged itself harshly, walks this same path. In forgiving themselves, the empath participates in a larger healing one that ripples beyond the self to touch the world. This ripple begins in the quiet moments, when you empath choose to sit with your regrets and breathe through their weight. It is in the act of writing a letter to your younger self not to erase their choices, but to honor their courage. It is in the pause before you apologize to yourself, whispering, "I see you, and I release you from this blame." These are the rituals of self-forgiveness, small yet seismic, that shift the empath's inner world. They are the steps toward individuation, toward a self that is whole, not because it is flawless, but because it is real. To forgive oneself is to claim the power of the integrated self, to stand in the tension of shadow and light, and choose love. It is to become a vessel not only for the world's pain, but for its possibility, a beacon of what it means to be deeply, beautifully human. The empath's path through self-forgiveness is a descent into the soul's wilder depths, where the archetypes of the collective unconscious clash and intertwine. The martyr, the healer, the wounded child. These figures are not mere roles, but living energies, shaping the empath's inner world with their demands and their dreams. To forgive oneself is to navigate this inner council, to listen to their voices without being consumed by them. It is to recognize that the shadow heavy with guilt and unspoken shame is not a flaw to be eradicated, but a partner in the dance of individuation. For the empath whose heart beats in rhythm with the world's joys and sorrows, this dance is both their burden and their liberation. The shadow's voice is loudest in moments of stillness, when the empath's endless giving pauses and the weight of their own unhealed wounds surfaces. These wounds are not abstract. They are specific, etched in moments of regret. The time they turned away from a loved one's need, overwhelmed by their own exhaustion. The boundary they failed to hold, letting resentment seep into their heart. The silence they chose when their voice could have healed. These moments, held tightly in the shadow, become the empath's silent accusers, proof of their perceived failure to live up to their own myth of boundless compassion. Yet Jung's wisdom reminds us that the shadow is not the enemy. It is the raw material of transformation, the unpolished stone that holds the spark of divinity. To forgive oneself is to touch this stone, to feel its rough edges without flinching. It is to ask, what was I protecting in that moment of failure? What was I learning? The empath, so skilled at unraveling others' motives, must turn this skill inward, peeling back the layers of their own choices. Modern psychology offers a lens here. Attachment theory suggests that the empath's tendency to prioritize others often stems from a deep-seated fear of abandonment, a belief that love is earned through sacrifice. When they falter, this belief becomes a whip, lashing them with the idea that they are unworthy of love unless they are perfect. Self-forgiveness challenges this, demanding that the empath see their worth as inherent, not contingent on their ability to save or soothe. What would it feel like, empath, to release the need to be everyone's savior, to stand in the wreckage of your own mistakes and say, "I am still whole"? This is the heart of self-forgiveness, not the erasure of guilt, but its transformation into understanding. It is the act of seeing your failures as teachers, not tyrants. The moment you snapped in anger, the time you withdrew in fear. These are not betrayals, but signals, cries from a soul asking to be seen. To forgive is to listen to these cries, to hold them with the same tenderness you offer a grieving stranger. It is to whisper to yourself, "You were human, and that is enough." This whisper ripples through the collective unconscious, where the stories of countless others echo the same struggle. The mother who lost patience, the friend who couldn't stay, the lover who let go their shadows too, seek forgiveness. The empath, attuned to this collective pulse, can draw strength from it, recognizing that their journey is not solitary, but shared. In forgiving themselves, they participate in a universal act of healing, one that weaves their personal redemption into the fabric of humanity's story. This is the power of the integrated self, not to stand apart from the world, but to stand within it, flawed and whole, a living bridge between the personal and the collective. The practice of self-forgiveness is not grand, but intimate, a series of quiet choices. It is in the moment you pause before judging yourself, choosing instead to ask, "What did I need then?" It is in the act of writing down your regrets and then burning the page, letting the ashes carry your shame to the wind. It is in the breath you take when guilt rises, reminding yourself that you are more than your worst moments. These acts, small as they seem, are revolutionary. They shift the empath's inner world, loosening the grip of the martyr archetype and inviting a new figure to emerge, the wise one who knows that compassion begins at home. This wise one is not perfect, but present, not flawless, but free. They understand that self-forgiveness is not a single act, but a lifelong practice, a spiral that circles ever closer to wholeness. For the empath, this practice is their greatest tool, the key that unlocks their capacity to love without losing themselves. It is the courage to stand in the tension of shadow and light, to choose compassion over condemnation, to weave their wounds into a tapestry of wisdom. In this act, the empath becomes not just a healer of others, but a healer of themselves, their heart, a flame that burns for all, including their own. The empath's spiral toward self-forgiveness tightens, drawing them closer to the core of their being, where the archetypes of the collective unconscious whisper truths both ancient and immediate. The shadow, that Jungian reservoir of all that is denied, no longer looms as a specter, but beckons as a guide, its contours softened by the light of self-compassion. For the empath, this journey is not about silencing the voices of guilt or shame, but about listening to them, hearing their stories, and releasing their hold. It is about recognizing that the moments they judge most harshly, the missteps, the silences, the failures, are not stains on their soul, but stitches in the fabric of their individuation, the process of becoming whole. This process is both tender and fierce, a reckoning with the self that demands courage as much as kindness. The empath, whose heart is a prism refracting the world's emotions, often carries a hidden belief that their worth is measured by their ability to hold others' pain without breaking. This belief, rooted in the archetype of the selfless healer, becomes a cage, locking them into a cycle of giving until they are empty. The shadow thrives here, feeding on the moments when they could not meet this impossible standard, when they snapped in frustration, withdrew in exhaustion, or chose their own needs over another's. To forgive oneself is to step out of this cage, to see these moments not as betrayals, but as acts of survival, signals from a soul crying out for balance. Jung's vision of the shadow as the seat of creativity offers a key here. The empath's so-called failures are not dead ends, but doorways, openings to deeper self-understanding. Consider the time you empath turned away from someone's need, overwhelmed by your own. The shadow would have you believe this was weakness, proof that you are not enough. But what if this moment was a lesson in boundaries, a reminder that even the most generous heart has limits? To forgive is to reframe this story, to see it as a step toward wholeness, rather than a fall from grace. It is to hold that version of yourself with the same compassion you offer a friend, to say, "You were learning, and that is enough." This reframing is grounded in the interplay of psychology and archetype. Attachment theory reveals how the empath's self-sacrificing patterns often stem from early experiences where love was tied to caretaking, where their value was measured by how well they soothed others. This creates a psychic knot. To prioritize oneself feels like a betrayal of love itself. Self-forgiveness unravels this knot, inviting the empath to see their worth as inherent, not earned. It is a radical act, one that challenges the collective unconscious's archetype of the martyr and calls forth a new figure, the integrated self who gives without losing themselves, who loves without erasing their own needs. What does it mean, empath, to stand in this integration? To look at your regrets and see not a ledger of debts, but a map of growth. It is to recognize that every moment of perceived failure was a moment of becoming, a step toward the wise one within you. This wise one knows that self-forgiveness is not a single act, but a rhythm, a pulse that beats through the daily choices to meet yourself with kindness. It is in the pause before you judge your anger, the breath you take when guilt rises, the quiet vow to honor your own needs as fiercely as you honor others. These are the rituals that weave the shadow into the self-transforming shame into wisdom. The collective unconscious echoes with this transformation, a chorus of souls who have faced their own shadows and found redemption in acceptance. The empath, so attuned to this collective, can feel its resonance, The mother who forgave her impatience, the friend who released their guilt, the lover who let go of blame. In forgiving themselves, the empath joins this chorus. They're healing a thread in the tapestry of humanity's story. This is the power of self-forgiveness. It does not isolate, but connects, weaving the personal into the universal. This connection begins in the quiet moments when you empath choose to sit with your pain and listen rather than judge. It is in the act of tracing your scars and seeing them as proof of your resilience, not your failure. It is in the whisper to your younger self, "You did what you could, and I love you for it." These acts, small yet seismic, shift the empath's inner world, loosening the martyr's grip and inviting a new archetype to rise, the one who heals by being whole, who loves by being real. In this, the empath finds their truest power, their compassion, a flame that burns for all, beginning with themselves. The empath's journey through self-forgiveness reaches its deepest turn, where the spiral of individuation draws them into a sacred confrontation with their own humanity. Here in the heart of the psyche, the archetypes of the collective unconscious martyr, healer, wounded child stand not as adversaries, but as companions, each holding a piece of the empath's truth. The shadow, that Jungian mirror of all that is disowned, no longer looms as a threat, but shines as a beacon illuminating the path to wholeness. For the empath, whose soul is a vessel for the world's unspoken emotions, this path is not about erasing their flaws, but embracing them, weaving every regret, every stumble into a tapestry of self-acceptance that radiates outward. This acceptance is the culmination of a fierce and tender alchemy. The empath, so accustomed to carrying the weight of others' pain, must now learn to carry their own with the same reverence. The shadows whispers, those moments of guilt over words unspoken, boundaries broken, or needs unmet, are not indictments, but invitations. They ask the empath to look closer, to see the humanity beneath the perceived failure. Jung taught that the shadow is the gateway to the self, the raw material of transformation. For the empath, this means recognizing that their mistakes are not proof of unworthiness, but evidence of their courage to feel deeply, to live fully within the messiness of being human. To forgive oneself is to stand in this truth, to meet the shadow with open eyes and an open heart. It is to ask, what was I seeking in that moment of faltering? The answer often lies in the interplay of attachment and identity. Modern psychology reveals that the empath's self-sacrificing nature is often rooted in early patterns, where love was earned through giving, where their worth was tied to soothing others' storms. When they fail to meet this impossible standard, the shadow rises, accusing them of betraying their purpose. But self-forgiveness rewrites this narrative, declaring that their purpose is not to be flawless, but to be whole, to love themselves as fiercely as they love the world. What would it mean, empath, to release the myth that you must be perfect to be enough, to stand before your own heart and say, I am worthy, not despite my flaws, but because of them? This is the essence of self-forgiveness, not a denial of pain, but a transformation of it, a shift from shame to wisdom. The moment you turned away, overwhelmed by another's need, was not a failure, but a plea for rest. The anger you let slip, sharp and unintended, was not a betrayal, but a signal of boundaries stretched too thin. To forgive is to hold these moments with the same compassion you offer a grieving stranger, to whisper, you were human, and that is enough. This whisper echoes through the collective unconscious, where the stories of countless others resonate with the same longing for redemption. The empath, attuned to this collective pulse, feels the weight and the wonder of this shared journey. Every soul who has stumbled, every heart that has judged itself harshly, walks this same path. In forgiving themselves, the empath becomes a thread in this larger tapestry, their healing a ripple that touches the world. This is the paradox of individuation. By turning inward, the empath connects more deeply with the universal, their personal redemption, a gift to the collective. The practice of self-forgiveness is a daily ritual, a quiet revolution. It is in the moment you pause before judging your past, choosing instead to ask, what did I learn? It is in the act of placing a hand on your heart and breathing through the weight of guilt, letting it dissolve into understanding. It is in the vow to meet your needs with the same urgency you offer others, to see your own pain as sacred. These acts, small yet profound, are the empath's most powerful tool, the compassion that frees them from the cage of self-judgment and invites them into wholeness. As the empath steps into this wholeness, they become a beacon, not of perfection, but of authenticity. Their compassion, once poured outward at the cost of their own heart, now flows freely, a river that nourishes both self and world. They stand as the wise one, the archetype who knows that healing begins within, that love is not earned, but given, starting with themselves. This is the gift of self-forgiveness. It transforms the empath from a vessel of others' pain into a flame of shared humanity, burning brightly in the tension of shadow and light. The individual who truly understands their depths extends that grace to the world.